Thanks for being here. The title comes from a paraphrase or translation, Limitation Empowers Growth, from the 60th hexagram of the I Ching. I Ching. While an intuitive call to just do it may suffice as an action manifesto for some, artists often set rules to work within and devise strict aesthetic systems. While rules are associated with constraint, and the artist's duty often perceived as breaking them, they can stimulate rather than curtail creativity. As a poet's imagination is challenged within the confines of a set verse form, such as a sonnet or a haiku, artists, through the use of guidelines, can gain unexpected outcomes and reach new aesthetic and conceptual heights. I have attempted to follow the example of artists who have chosen to create within limits by constructing my own aesthetic playbook. I took a circuitous path to photography. I started out as a painter, while my chosen profession is archivist librarian. In the university library, I process and make available for study archival records ranging from institutional papers to rare books and manuscripts. I am fulfilled in this custodial role, but while caring for the work of others, an impulse emerged. It was a desire to create something of my own outside of the organizational context. An opportunity arose with digital photography and my explorations into social media. The editor of a popular blog in my hometown invited me to become a kind of photographer in residence. The blog, which centers on the history and culture of Lowell, Massachusetts, draws about 1,000 viewers daily. Capturing and sharing work in this public forum also offered feedback through commentary. These interactions worked as a generative system, prompting a diaristic creation of images. While identifying and preserving collections are my main professional responsibilities, another duty that institutional archivists and records managers perform, not popularly associated with archives, is the charge to destroy material that lacks informational significance or has been deemed confidential. Since archival materials are usually unique, decisions as to what to destroy and what to ignore, and thereby assigned to eventual loss, are irrevocable. With the stakes so high, the field of archives is an intensely self-analytical profession and academic discipline. Another task that falls to the archivist is the selective redaction of sensitive information in documents that are yet retained. I have come to associate the full destruction of informational materials with mortality and the loss of consciousness, while the practice of redaction is more nuanced. With redaction, evidence is consigned to oblivion in part rather than in full. The selective negation of information is a concept that I have brought with me to my photographic work. Photographs created for the Lowell blog were of such things as ironwork, architectural details, and signage, captured during my on-foot wanderings of the city. This attention to everyday items bears comparison to the notion of the post-industrial character of the flaneur, as derived from Baudelaire by Walter Benjamin. The flaneur is a casual idler, a browser who engages in collecting impressions and examining common objects and ideas. A recurrent comment on these photographs was that they drew attention to things that people have passed by many times without noticing. It was also remarked that the work made the too familiar visible. Within the blog forum, however, a conundrum arose. My preference would have been to share photographs untethered to information, breaking with my professional practice of assigning content data. The blog's mission as a public information source, my own ethical position of facilitator to research, obliged me to provide captioning and even respond to online inquiries. While I had begun to make something independent of my profession, I had not fully departed from its systems of documentation. With my start in the LUCAD program in 2015, came the metaphorical childhood's end of my impression-driven, picturesque approach to photography. I began to see that concept must take precedent over artifact, understanding that my role as a practitioner of ideas needed to come before photography as a tool of expression. In order to move forward from work that, in the words of Oliver Wausau, was all over the place, to something consistently valid and identifiable, I came to see making art as a type of project management. In order to bring concepts to a fully developed state and fuse prevalent directions, I inventoried the predominant ideas in my work and organized images according to shared concepts and visual attributes. My motifs included the depiction of fragmentation through framing, netherworld spaces devoid of human presence, the endeavor of collecting, and tableau photography, as well as redacted and blocked imagery. Consciously cataloging the various directions was the initial step in devising an approach to unifying them. I would describe the idea of the netherworld as a realm that is neither day nor night, where the curtains are drawn but not to the effect of full darkness, and consciousness engages with the prospect of oblivion. Pursuing this idea, I studied the lighting techniques used in film noir and chiaroscuro painting. As a counteragent to my meandering, dare I say it, romantic approach to image making, I studied the work of Berndt and Hilla Becher, which is comprised almost entirely of photographic documentation of industrial behemoths in architecture. Behind the Becher's use of recurrent subject matter was a militant goal of liberating photography from its expressionistic use in order to bring it back to a strict objectivity, presenting a truth of reality as it is. The Bechers set for themselves strict rules. The images are devoid of human activity, color, foreground effects, blur, reflections, off-center placement, lens distortions, cropping of the subject, and cast shadows and clouds. All of these things that I love using in photography. The effect of the Becher's near minimalist avoidance of the picturesque in the depiction of 19th and early 20th century architectures has been described as melancholy without nostalgia. While my work bears little in common with theirs but a straight-on frontality and the absence of human presence, the Bechers were a model of the effectiveness of remaining steadfast to a set formula. Over the years, I have collected printed materials and retained artifacts that have caught my eye or that hold personal memories. But I had no clear plan of how I would ever put these things to use. I approached the aesthetic possibilities of my collections by revisiting the work of Joseph Cornell, who confined objects and images within boxes that work as windows into the world of ideas. Cornell's collecting is legendary, and according to scholar Brian O'Doherty, he went further than any other artist in the 20th century, save Kurt Schwitters, in compiling an archive of material to turn into art. His stockpile of material was meticulously organized by type, and I've tried to follow his example. Also, under Cornell's influence, I placed myself in a curatorial position, that of one who examines, arranges, and presents. Rather than create permanent assemblages after the fashion of Cornell, I opted for virtual constructs, tableaus that are set up, photographed, and dismantled. While I still engage exterior scenes, my work has become more interior. For this movement inward, I studied the artificial constructs of contemporary artists Thomas Demand and James Casimir, each of whom create uncannily realistic architectural models devoid of human presence, as well as David Leventhal, who uses toys and dolls rather than human beings in his evocative scenarios. Initially, I photographed the groups of artifacts, but came to limit their number to one in a given scenario, positioned before a two-dimensional background. Thomas Demand has observed that when objects are photographed together, the viewer instinctively imagines a narrative of how these things might interact with each other. In light of this dynamic, I have chosen to limit the conversation between a single object and the scene within which it is placed. While the classic figure-ground relationship is in play, the connection between the two elements that most concerns me is conceptual. A figure finds its ground through the consideration of how these things might relate to each other, and by experimenting with different variations and resonances. For the central object of the tableaus, I select from a collection of oddments, such things as containment vessels or metal objects. For the ground, I enlist art prints, photographs, the end papers of old books, and as with Cornell, texts and maps. My studio setups reference the use of painted backdrops employed by professional photographers as a standard feature from the 1860s onward, as well as the illusionistic device of blue screen used in cinema. Deploying the camera predominantly in the vertical mode is not my natural preference. However, this approach evolved as I captured upright exterior structures such as smokestacks, antennas, and towers. With these two untitled photographs, both taken on August 21st, 2015, I began to consciously choose vertical presentation and orientation, more doorway than picture window, no matter the theme or content. I have taken to the vertical for its significant associative meanings and as a deliberate self-limiting strategy to see what outcomes I might arrive at within this constraint. Using a camera to create images in the horizontal landscape orientation employs an aspect ratio of 4:3, which closely emulates the bioptic human field of vision. It is immersive and cinematic, even restive. When turned 90 degrees to the vertical portrait mode, the orientation calls upon the viewer to scan the image up and down rather than accept a natural optical fit. In a way, the vertical positioning of the camera partially redacts the normal field of vision. A strict verticality has been applied to objects in my studio work, which include glass vessels, microphones, and upright book spines. Throughout history, humankind has created a sense of place by erecting stone cairns and vertical steels. The yearning for deities or the transcendent is made manifest in community settings through building structures such as minarets and church spires. Upright structures, such as columns, are also associated with strength and fertility. My later work attempts to combine verticality, tableau photography, redaction, and I use the lighting techniques referenced in my netherworld period. The idea of the flaneur and collecting are also in play, as the objects and images depicted were acquired by wandering shops and browsing flea markets. I continue to employ the vertical element that divides or blocks other imagery, be it an apothecary jar blocking a Vermeer, a flagpole bisecting a mural of Pope Francis, or a chrome shaft redacting the signature on a painting as it intrudes upon a harpooner at his work. These redactive gestures, carried out through framing and sectioning the world, circle back to my profession as an archivist. This rule-based discipline that I have sought to distance myself from ultimately exercises its hold as the urge to save engages with the need to destroy or efface. Time will tell how effectively I will engage rules and systems, both externally imposed and consciously chosen, in order to arrive at a destination somewhere between the exacting and the uncertain. Professor Sununa Sanyal has observed of contemporary art, today the game is recombination, and I feel that my work is in concert with this idea. In conclusion, I would like to point out that the notion of art as a game has surfaced a number of times during my enrollment in LUCAD program. Games have rules, and I often call to mind Marshall McLuhan's 1967 assertion that art is anything you can get away with, which characterizes the artist as engaged in a contest to outwit the system. When I explored this idea in one of my papers, Professor Stuart Steck picked up the theme while extricating it from McLuhan's cynical tone with the following pronouncement, which is sort of a benediction for my time at LUCAD. The meaning and significance of art is never innate, but is defined by a set of external contextual factors and discourses, or what one might call rules. The artist must become a master chess player, constantly adjusting his or her artistic practice to accommodate the discursive framework that gives shape to the art world and its discourses. And while the prizes of the art game certainly include fame and fortune, I think that they also include a substantive measure of success, i.e., producing work that is authentically challenging, meaningful, enduring, and satisfying.
I was wondering, you showed a lot of the images side by side. You know, you had the vertical images, one on your screen.
Together because I wanted to see how they relate to each other.
So is that part of the way you would normally show them? Do they meant to go together, or is that just?
They're kind of meant to go together.
Okay.
They're going to be shown together at real close, a tight.
Oh, okay. So that is part of what they're about. Because what's interesting is that when you put them together like that, they go back to being horizontal. I mean, the entire set together.
Yeah, they're going to be 8 in a row, so they're going to be horizontal.
Okay.
But as you scan each of them, you're going to scan up and down.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, that's it.
So you were describing, just so I have the right picture here, you were describing the blog about Lowell.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where you work as an art columnist?
I work at UMass Lowell.
Oh, okay. But
The blog is a community group that's actually founded by the head of the Register of Deeds and Records, and it became like an alternative to the local newspaper for getting information, because the local newspaper is very biased. So it became a community forum to put up stuff about politics and news, and if there was a national item about Lowell, it gets in there. Anything having to do with Lowell's culture gets reposted on the blog.
so I guess my question is, in your activities of going to the shops and the flea markets and collecting as preliminary to the work, is all that located within the area that you live and work in? Is it specific to that place?
Well, the pictures I posted on the blog were all in the Lowell area. The objects don't come into the blog at all. My collections. But the blog, it would all be it would be, something someone saw, something I saw, like a piece of terracotta in an architecture, and I put it up. It's like I got a telephoto lens, and it's like at the 5th floor. No one's ever noticed it before. And I got comments on how they'd walked by that 100 times, they'd never seen it.
But in some way, all of your collecting and curating of the objects and photographing them in various groups and dispositions becomes a record of the landscape that you live in.
Not the way the Beschers is a record, though.
But the Beschers ranged from Europe to America. They were documenting the Industrial Revolution, which is specific to a variety of sites. But I think what I'm asking in your work, is it specific to the site of your practice?
I've broken away from that. I mean, I sort of broke with the blog, and I'm doing my own thing now.
Okay, we're not talking about the blog. We're just talking about your practice now. And what I'm doing is I'm curious about a kind of unifying strategy that allows all of the disparate elements in your photographs, in your collections, to be seen as specific to the landscape of your life, and perhaps even specific to the place, like an experimental geography,
Right.
if you will, that tells a story through objects of traffic,
Right.
of cultural histories, your own interventions. So they're all specific to this particular place, even though they look so disparate.
They're not all from Lowell, though. I mean,
But you found them in Lowell,
most of them, yeah,
that's what I mean.
yeah.
They might come from everywhere, but then
The
they
Pope,
pick up.
the
It's
Pope is in New York,
possible.
the Pope is in New York City, the Pope picture.
Okay. Thank you for that clear. Who else?
Sure.
I'm just kind of adding onto that, is just this curiosity about a couple of the pictures that you put up. There were the bottles, and then there's that kind of architectural cathedral space. And I was curious if, yeah, that, and then the one on the left, actually all three of these have these kind of vast backgrounds, and I'm wondering, are those, how do you set them up? Are they
That's-
spaces in Lowell? Are they photographs from books? Like what?
That's in my room. That's what I do in my room when I'm alone. All three of those prints are the prints that you get at the National Gallery for cheap, and the Escher too, yeah.
Because, okay, so when you showed that little table setup, that was to give us a sense of how all of these
This
were
is how
made.
it's made.
Okay, so I didn't know that that applied to everything that you've been doing.
Well, it doesn't apply to this part here, right?
Okay.
And the Pope, see, I'm trying to make it all look not seamless, but I'm trying to get the exterior and the interior to come together. And that's, the Pope is sort of almost imitating what I do in the studio by using him as a background and a foreground object.
So it's kind of a ready-made that you found.
Yeah, I
in
took-
it's situation specific though, rather
Right.
than a setup.
And it
whereas
took
these
about
other ones-
250 shots. Sorry, Mark. 250 photographs.
Yeah, I just really want to clarify. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jody.